bed issues. Mics are on, if you will. I didn't turn them on.
Okay.
There you go.
I'm gonna wait. Why is it not working? Oh, it's been a long day.
One minute. That's my line. All right, I've got 5:45, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. If everyone would stand for a moment of silence, and then we'll have the pledge. Madam Recorder, if you'd call the roll.
Chairman Floyd,
Present.
Laura Harrison, Deborah Thomas, Jeremy Burnett, Michelle Childs, Superintendent Horrell.
Here.
Do have a quorum. Mr. Superintendent, would you lead us through our agenda?
I will. The first item is the opportunity for public comment.
Would anyone from the public like to speak? Hearing none. Next item.
Next item is our report section, starting with the chairman's welcome.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our April work session. It feels like it should be March still for some reason, but hope everyone had a good spring break and a good Easter holiday. We are rapidly moving towards the end of the school year. We have TN Ready coming up, but it's been an eventful year, and we thank everyone for their patience and grace as we move through this challenging time. Having said that, we'll move to our next item.
Next item is the TLN representative update.
Yes, the General Assembly has been busy, so I have several bills to cover. Okay, I will start with the first two that will become law. The The first one is SB 124 HB 475. And this essentially makes it where the school can notify a parent or guardian of child abuse so that we're in line with the federal law. The second one is SB 479 HB 533. And this is what we have been hoping for, a teacher reciprocity bill. So that has officially passed the Senate and the House. The next few are looking promising. They will most likely be passed. So I'll go through those. SB 224 HB 155. And that encourages a joint economic and community development board in each county that would include representation for school systems within the county. This is something that's been on the TSBA agenda. The next is SB 636 HB 1342, and this is basically adding clarifying language that a school is not closed if they're working remotely or providing virtual learning. That's specific to a law, so I assume that may have a time limit depending on the emergency orders. Next is SB 653 HB 1534, and this is a grow your own district teacher training program. There's quite a bit. Next is SB 1223 HB 890. And this is authorizing an LEA to remove a student in grades 7 through 12 without assigning alternative if they're expelled for violence or threatened violence. Then we have SB 1377 HB 795, and this is allowing funds for student technology devices and removing the CTE only designation. Next, we have SB 1579 HB 1570, and well, this will require the Tennessee Department of Education to ensure meaningful consultation with stakeholders, including school boards, teachers, before recommending any major changes. So that's what has passed or is about to be passed. Next, we have a few things that I wanted to make mention that is coming up this week. The first one is SB 1336 HB 1516. And this is basically allowing the Tennessee Department of Education to remove superintendents and school board members if there is if the school district or certain schools are not performing. And they would be able to appoint the superintendent and the school board member. Next, we have SB 1125 HB 235. And this is just simply moving a competitive bid from $10,000 to $25,000 without having to make it a competitive bid. Lastly, on this piece, although I'm not quite done, is SB 788 HB 1305, and this will require open enrollment within a school district. I also wanted to mention something we had talked about previously. There was a bill, SB 1156, that was sponsored by Kelsey to allow an appeal of the third grade mandatory retention that's coming in the future to be appealed by the parents, but that bill has been removed from the calendar and it's dead. And there's also another bill being discussed this week about the BEP, SB 774, about the BEP being the calculation used for 2021 for the upcoming year. And lastly, I did want to make mention about the Federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. It's a $1.9 trillion pandemic recovery, which includes $122 billion for K through 12 public schools, and 20% of the ESSER must be used for learning loss. That is finally the end.
Thank you, Ms. Childs, for that report. Any questions on the TLN report?
Understand you correctly, the mandatory retention, third grade, the amendment to that is dead, so the mandatory retention at third grade with the certain T and ready scores or whatever it is
The bill is still active. There was just an amendment that we had mentioned at one of the school board meetings that Kelsey has sponsored that would allow parents to appeal the results.
So at this point, the way it stands as it's moving through is there's a mandatory retention with certain criteria. Is that correct?
There's a mandatory retention starting in, 2022, 23 school year, I believe. It's in a couple school years.
Yes.
And the exception is if you attend summer school or after-school tutoring.
Yeah, there are, it's not quite as, when people say it's mandatory, it's not quite as cut and dry as that. What they're saying is that retention is one of the options. The other options are mandatory summer learning loss camps, or as Ms. Child said, she pretty much nailed it, after-school tutoring. So basically, you would say, your scores are here are the three options. You can either be retained or you can participate in one of these programs. We are,
All it requires is participation. It doesn't require passing scores in the summer program. Like, has that been set that, like, do you have to take another test to be able to then go on, or has that been nailed out
at
yet?
this point, there is not a second assessment. Oh, there's a third option that actually you can retake the TCAP almost immediately, and if you pass it, then you wouldn't have to do any of the other things. That was the one I was forgetting. If you participate in the other programs, you would not have to test into it. But I will say that the legislators have said many times, including on calls in which we were included, that we have a couple of years to fix this. So, we don't quite know. They may add something more restrictive. They could make it less restrictive. But at this point, there's not a second test that would be required.
I keep it on the radar. And
Absolutely.
so what is, you said the superintendent or school board removal, so the bill is up this week in the full House and Senate? It's already passed all the education?
No,
Okay.
it is under the, when TSBA gives us the helpful list, it is one of the significant legislation for this week, this coming week.
Do you know if it's in the education committee or it's actually making it to the floor?
It is set for the House Education Instruction Subcommittee.
Any other questions for the TLN report? Hearing none. Next item.
Next item is the superintendent's report, and I do have a few things I'll share with you at this time. Board members want to let you know, the employees know, the bonuses that you approved last month have, or maybe the previous month, the bonuses that you approved based on the governor's allocation of funds for certain employees, and then we expanded that to cover all employees using ESSER 2.0, hit employee paychecks on Thursday of last week, so thanks for your support of that. I'm sure that was appreciated for sure. Speaking of something being initiated that we've been discussing, the extension of Campus Drive is now complete, as every parent, I think, at LPS knows, at least 2 drives in the car, so parents are getting the opportunity to take a closer look around the site at the construction activity that is all continuing on progress. You can definitely see new things happening there on the site every day as the walls get higher and the foundations get poured different places. It's just pretty remarkable how quickly they're working there. The area that we continue to keep an eye on is the athletic fields on the far side, on the far east side of the campus. As we know, we have an MOU with the City of Lakeland that says we will have those fields ready to deliver in playable condition on August 1st. I can tell you that we've been leaning very, very, very heavily on the contractors to make sure that happens. We're getting into the period where if the sod doesn't get down pretty soon, there'll definitely be some question as to whether or not that can happen, but I'm just trying to be transparent about where we are. That's really the only area of the project where we have concerns about the timeline. But as of this point, we have been told that it's very possible and likely that they'll meet that deadline, but I'll continue to keep this board posted for sure, as I know there's a lot of interest in that area. We are also continuing to work on the identification of property for a future elementary school. Dr. Mitchell and I have continued to be very busy with that and have been talking to property owners about different possibilities in Lakeland. And again, we'll continue to keep everybody posted on that. But just like you all know, it continues to be a high priority and on the radar. As the chairman mentioned, testing begins in Lakeland School System on April 26th. Just so folks know, we did opt. We had some bit more flexibility in terms of the timetable for testing this year. We had some different options, and we did choose the latest, basically possible timetable, which is why you may hear of some systems or other schools that are testing ahead of us. We're not missing anything. Don't panic. We just chose to give the teachers and the students more time, which was the teachers' request, and we feel good about that decision. We did send home information regarding assessment for remote learners last week, and have been answering the number of questions that come with that. The state, just so we're clear with everyone, the state did not give an option outside of in-person assessment for those that are remote learners. We are asking and inviting all of our remote learners to come in and take the assessment, but we've said this to parents, and we'll say this to everybody. Aside from getting an excused absence, if parents do not feel comfortable bringing their children in, there are really no consequences beyond that. We are expected to have 80% of our students participate, and we feel certain that we will have 80% participate, and we would love to have all of the remote learners come in so we can get some good, valuable data on what their learning has been like this year. But as always, we are sensitive to certainly the pandemic and different folks' reaction to the pandemic, and if they don't feel like that's appropriate at this time, we're working with parents as we've been working with them all year in that regard. We are also busy working on plans for summer learning support opportunities, which are state mandated this year. This is somewhat related but a bit different from the retention law that Ms. Childs discussed, but basically the state said that you will and you must offer summer learning opportunities. They have provided the funding for that, so we're preparing. We have identified the first group of students that will be invited to those camps and expect to get information home to those parents likely by the end of this week is the goal for that first round of what we call priority students, and those are the students based on our benchmark assessments that would most benefit from additional remediation. We've gauged the teachers to find out who's interested. We think the camps will be great. We'll have great teachers, we'll have great curriculum, and certainly any opportunity to continue learning is a good one. And we're very excited that Ms. Beauvais at the middle school and Ms. Lewis at the elementary school will serve as the administrators for those summer learning opportunities. So some familiar faces there, and we're excited that they've stepped up to help out with that. The information went home today about the family life curriculum for our middle school students. This is something that happens annually. It is state mandated and state overseen, and anyone that has questions about that can certainly talk to Ms. Pickens. They always do a great job of making sure that that curriculum is handled appropriately, but parents do have the opportunity to opt out if they do review any of the material and feel like that's not what they want their children to participate in at school. We are, I keep saying we're busy doing things. It's a busy time of year. The end of the year always is. This one maybe more than many. We've been very happy, as I said, to the Lakeland Currents about the applications we've gotten for vice principal, both in terms at the high school, both in terms of the quantity and the quality of those applications. We'll be vetting those applications this week and setting up interviews for next week. We are leaving the application open. We certainly don't want to turn anybody away, and it wouldn't be uncommon to have multiple rounds of interviews because we're going to keep looking until certainly we get the person that we think is the best person for the job, but that's certainly an exciting process. Did want to give just a couple of numbers on our online registration that was completely online this year, as it was really forced to be last year. It's probably one of those things that we were forced into during the pandemic and may stick with for some time. At LES, we had 178 who did not register as far as the returning students, and at LPS we had 173, which sounds like a lot. It's about 16% and 20%, but those are actually better numbers than we have gotten in the past with in-person registration. And what happens, whether it's in-person or online, the school staff then contacts those families individually to find out what their intentions are for next year, which helps with the planning. So that was another good opportunity. I wanted to recognize the Lakeland Elementary PTA and the Lakeland Chamber, who, as we know and have discussed, they set up the golf tournament during the pandemic, as they do annually, to raise funds for Lakeland Elementary School, and they recently presented those checks to the PTA based on the hard work that they did. And then also, if everyone's not aware, the PTA is having their annual auction this year. It is an online event, and today, we may have missed it. Maybe it was 5 o'clock, I think. Is that just for dinner?
I think that's the dinner portion, if I read it correctly, that
Okay.
you possibly can still buy tickets to bid, but you can't participate in the dinner.
Okay,
If I
thank
read
you.
it-
That
if I
sounds
read it
right.
correctly.
That sounds right. There was a deadline today at 5, but the annual auction, you're probably right, they probably want as many as they can to bid, will be online this year, and I think they open that up on Thursday, and it goes through Saturday evening, and as always, just have unbelievable baskets and prizes and gifts lined up so folks can sit in the comfort of their own home this year, which is not nearly as fun as going to the event, but still, they could sit there and bid on any of those packages, so they can go to the Lakeland Elementary PTA page, not PTO, the PTA page, to check that out and register. I did want to mention to the board, in way of the final item of the report, Lakeland City Manager Shane Horn reached out to me today regarding an agenda item that the Board of Commissioners apparently took up on the possibility of the city transferring property to the school system for a future central office at Lakeland Commons. They actually inquired about getting in front of the board with some response regarding our interest in that for this month. And what I spoke to Shane about was that usually in May, that's when I go and present our approved budget to the Board of Commissioners, and thought that would give us a little more time and also would dovetail with a budget presentation to kind of, since we have not discussed it at any length, maybe we could take an opportunity to talk about that if the board saw fit to place an agenda item on our business meeting for this month. We could maybe discuss that and come up with some thoughts to present back to the Board of Commissioners. So that concludes my report.
Any questions for the superintendent? Ms. Childs?
Okay, I had a couple questions. First, what do you think might cause the fields to be delayed? You mentioned it might not.
No, we've had a couple of, I mean, if you ask the contractor, what they would say is that they've had, I think, well, I know it's 60 plus, it may be 70 plus days of rain since the project started. There was also a delay a significant delay that was caused by the tribal council, where the USDA would not allow any work to happen on the property for the first couple of months that we were under construction. That one's significant and was a showstopper, and that was pandemic related. But it became a kind of federal issue, I guess, or a piece of red tape that we just couldn't get through. And then once we got through that, the rain started, becoming an issue. And unfortunately, with growing grass, there's no amount of overtime or extra work or working on Sundays or, working early or late that'll make any difference. At some point, the grass either establishes and grows up or it doesn't. Their original goal was if they could get the sod installed by late March, they felt like that was a reasonable amount of time for it to grow in April, May, June, July. And you have to, cut it twice a week and fertilize it and kind of tend to it. But those are the two primary kind of issues that have led to the delay, which, to be fair, are not really anybody's fault.
And the last two I had was, at what point will we know how many remote learners are participating in the testing?
That's a great question. I believe I know the communication that went home requested parents to kind of just let us know. There is no opt-out. There's no official opt-out, but we can say, are you planning to send your child? So those should be coming in now, and I don't recall what the deadline was, if there was one. Because she's not on a mic, that's Assistant Superintendent Angie Deloso reporting that the parents were given the options that, are you planning to bring your child in? Are you planning to not bring your child in? Or do you have questions that would help you make that decision? And she believes that possibly by the end of this week, we'd have a pretty good count of what those numbers are. Because we certainly want to know before the testing starts if we're going to make our 80%.
And my last question is, do you anticipate we'll have enough teachers for the summer programs? Because I've heard that some districts are struggling with that in other states.
In other systems?
Yeah, other
Yeah,
systems. and other-
we got a nice initial response, and that was actually before we had determined what the pay was going to be, and the amount that we're going to be able to pay is actually double what we initially said was we were going to be able to pay, because there is a minimum. The minimum was well, I'll tell you, the minimum was $1,000 a week. So we've decided to use the maximum that you're allowed to pay the teachers, because you're allowed to do that, and it was in the budget that they gave us. So we think that will probably get some additional interest, but we'll go from there. They don't have to actually be Lakeland school system teachers for whatever that's worth. So, I mean, obviously our desire would be that every one of them would be, but if we had to do this state mandated summer camp with teachers that were not our own, we would have that option.
Any other questions for the superintendent? Mr. Burnett?
Dr. Earl, in regards to the item on the potential property at Lakeland Town Square, remind me, we discussed that at a previous board meeting, just briefly, right?
It did come up as an agenda item, and was requested that we discuss, yeah. So it was a very broad overview, if I recall. Yeah.
And if I remember right, either one of you, I guess, weigh in, we had tentatively agreed that we would be interested as a board, but that we couldn't commit necessarily because, at that time, because of timeframes, our interest in need to support another school at some point. Am I remembering that properly?
I think you're correct. I think we left it whether we're interested in having the conversation with the city as to what it would look like, and I think that was done back in November.
And what prompted us to have that conversation?
I
We didn't come up on it with that idea on our own, though, is what I'm asking.
believe it was a request from the city.
Okay. All right. And is it worthwhile for us to consider adding that as an agenda item for next week?
I think based on the information that Dr. Horrell's brought forward, we should add it to our regular business agenda next week.
I think in this instance, they'd like me to, I think, formally address the board with the board's thoughts on that. And since it is a potential acquisition, certainly the board, it's not day-to-day operational, so the board input would be necessary for me to present something to the Board of Commissioners.
Any other questions, Ms. Harrison?
You talked about the athletic fields that have the MOU with the city. Are the other athletic fields that we have on track for use for our fall sports for the actual games for this fall? I know there was some, we think we're on track for like football to be able to use their field for their actual games, not their summer practices, but are we still on track to be able to have that available for use with the construction going on, or?
Do you mean our existing fields, like the football fields?
Yes. But
Yes.
they weren't going to be available, I know, for the summertime training or whatever, potentially due to construction in the area and whatever.
Right.
But
Yes, the turf football field, what's currently the Lakeland Middle football field, it should be, it's expected to be available for the fall football season. Yes.
for the actual games,
For the actual games, not for the practices necessarily, but for the actual games, as will be and should be. In fact, it has to be if any of it's available. The new home side bleachers.
And then the question has come up, I've seen some parents ask about schedules for LPS are going to be handled a little differently this year, and how the kids will pick their courses for, because I think last year parents did it through Skyward, and there's potentially some change. Do you know when information will come out about that for how they'll pick their 6th, 7th, and 8th grade electives or MAPS courses or whatever? Is that information coming home from the school, or is there any insight you can give as to what that is? I know there were some changes this year, but I'm not exactly
It would
sure.
come from the school, and I'd have to check on if I know there has been some talk about it, and when I asked the question, the response was, we always do it after the registration, and then we know who we're asking to select the classes. But I'm not sure of the timetable, but could certainly find out. It would come from the school, though. That's a school.
Been questions about, hey, I thought we did this through Skyward, and since they did their registration, I guess people were thinking, okay, we need to do this
Would happen
through
at the same
Skyward.
time, yeah.
And so they were thinking they were supposed to do it, and they missed some steps, so that's why I'm just,
Gotcha. I can follow up on
Yeah.
that. Yep,
Yeah.
for sure.
let's the central office discussion, I know through the budget meetings this week, would it be appropriate for us to be able to have one-on-one questions and discussion? I know we can put it on our agenda next week, but there's some detailed questions I'd like to ask, maybe for you to have answers for.
Absolutely. I think that would be a great opportunity to discuss that. Yeah. And just so everybody knows, we traditionally schedule one-on-one meetings between me and the board members to discuss the budget in detail after we do the overview at the work session, and then before the voting agenda item on the budget during the business meeting. So certainly, those individual meetings would be a great time to give feedback or ask questions that hopefully I could come back next Monday with some responses. Yep.
Any other questions for the superintendent? Somewhat related to registration, and we've talked about this, I think, last week as well, or at our last meeting. While we don't know what the future is, the plan is to have 5 days a week in-person learning next year. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you for asking that. That's our intention, that's our hope. At this point, I still feel like, and even in spite of some bumps that we're seeing different places, I think overall, when they talk about kind of a race against time between the vaccine and the cases, I still think we appear to be trending in the right direction, and that's kind of the sense that we're getting from our health department partners as well. So, yes, that we would return to 5 days a week in person. Hopefully, as close to normal as we'd like to get.
Mr. Burnett?
It reminded me, you had, I think, had reached out to us to ask our thoughts on having central office staff, giving them the flexibility to volunteer for the vaccination center. I was just wondering if you'd had people bite, a number of people, pardon the term, but bite on the opportunity.
Actually, I sent that out earlier today, so they haven't had much time, but I did send that out today. And Mr. Burnett's referring to giving central office staff the opportunity to volunteer at the joint Lakeland Arlington Bartlett vaccination site at I believe First Baptist. What's the
Baptist.
Faith Baptist? Thank you, Faith Baptist Church. So we're giving them the opportunity to do 2 half-day shifts as board-approved absences on the thought that community vaccination impacts schools, and we want to help in any way we can. So.
Other questions for the superintendent? Hearing none, next item.
All right, next item, we'll move past the approval. Well, we have the approval of the agenda. It's a work session, but
Any additions to the agenda or changes? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Next item.
Next item, moving through the consent agenda into the discussion items, we have the approval of minutes of the business meeting from March 8th.
This is a work session. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, any objection to carrying this item over to our consent agenda? Hearing no objection, we'll carry this item over to our consent agenda. Next item.
Next item is discussion action on the FY 21-22 budget.
Dr. Hoare, I'll see your name beside it.
It is there. I have to move the mic. I'm going to just move over here a bit. There's a chair over here. Sorry for the awkward transition. We're still getting this down over here, the new technology. All right. So first of all, I want to acknowledge and thank Jessie Rosales, our Director of Finance, who's here with us. She certainly does the lion's share on putting what you see in the budget document together. And just to kind of go over what that process looks like, we actually kind of work on the budget all year long, if you think about it. We have frequent conversations, either they're quick emails, sometimes text, or they come up in our directors' meetings or principals' meetings where we will just mention to Ms. Rosales that this is something that we need to think about for next year's budget. We also do the same thing with things that we might need to take out for next year's budget. There is a process where we go through technology, we go through curriculum, we go through software, we go through different applications and make sure that what we're investing these taxpayer dollars in is the things that we're investing in are being utilized by the teachers or by the staff, and if we find that they're not, then we either cut them out and replace them, or sometimes we find we cut them out and don't replace them if it's not something that was effective use of funds. So, and then at the end, Ms. Rosales has the most difficult job of kind of tying it up in a bow and making sure that it works with our revenue projections in a way that we can educate these kids the best way that we know how. So what I have done in the past, and as long as it works for the board, we'll continue to do, is kind of go over an overview, which basically just lets you know what are the kind of the big areas. Where do we see changes? So we can kind of assume that if it's not changed, it worked, and we're kind of leaving it as it is, or at least close to it. But this will give you an idea of kind of what we've seen over the last year and what we're looking towards for next year. So we always start with the budget assumptions, which mostly has to do with how many students do we have. That's the main driver of the budget numbers on the revenue side, and certainly impacts the main driver on the expenses side, which is how many people do we need to educate these students. So we're starting our budget process with the assumption that next year we'll have 1,940 students in grades K through 8, and I will note that that actually does not include the preschool students. They're not factored into that number, so it can be a bit misleading when we talk about how many bodies are in the building. We receive no funding for the preschool students, actually, despite the fact that it's mandated by federal law that we educate them, and we're happy to do, but that's our special ed preschool program. That would be an increase of 40 students, and I want to note that these numbers in terms of the growth and the minus, that's based on, that's relative rather to last year's budget assumptions, not necessarily to where those numbers are right now. So I do that because that's what impacts the budget. So last year we were forecasting 1,900 students for this year, and we're now forecasting 40 more than we were last year. We're forecasting 1,052 students at LES, which is 52 more than from last year, and 888 students at LPS, which is actually down 12 from last year. We overshot at LPS a little bit last year. So what we're forecasting for this next year is down 12 from what it was at that time. We are projecting the need for one more teacher at LES and no net change at LPS. As we continue with the budget assumptions, we're not planning to request any additional operational funds from the City of Lakeland. We have to date not ever requested any additional operational funds, which is one option that the Board of Education has in the budget process, but that's not one we have availed ourselves of. Certainly capital funds, and I like to make that distinction so nobody says, he says they've never given him any money. The city's been very generous in terms of capital funds, but we have not requested the recurring ongoing operational funds. And we're going to plan to stick with our plan or approach of making budgeted contributions to our OPEB fund at $150,000 and supplementing those with fund balance as appropriate, or sometimes as we feel like is we're able to do. During this past year, we have not supplemented that because we're keeping an eye on the high school budget. All right, this year what we see is an increase of total budgeted revenues from $17.74 million, which was the number we used last year, to $19.25 million. And when you look at the assumptions, I think it may be easy to ask the question, if we were only looking at 40 more students, why are we talking about $1.5 million more dollars or so? And the reason is the BEP, for one. Because we have been growing in the last 2 years, last year's budget actually did not include the growth funds that we wound up getting that year. This year's budget basically includes 2 years' worth of growth funds. We did include the growth. We just recently, very recently, got the growth funds projections for this year. I'm sorry, they're not growth fund projections, the actual growth. At the end of the year, the state kind of trues up with districts that had more students than they were projected to have by the state's projections. And they actually adjust the BEP kind of at the end to make sure you get the money based on the number of kids you actually educated. And that's only if it's, a certain percentage above the projections. This past year, there were only 9 districts in the state of Tennessee that received growth funds. And that is much, much lower than in a typical year. And that's due, probably obviously, to COVID-19. There are a lot of students that went elsewhere or didn't register. You may read stories about the lost students in different school districts. And it actually impacted a lot of budgets. And that's why the legislation that Ms. Childs alluded to, where they would hold the BEP exactly the same from last year. That's also called a BEP hold harmless. That phrase is used, is so important to so many districts. We feel very fortunate that we're not one of those, and despite the pandemic, our enrollment has continued to climb. So I think that is pretty significant. 146 districts in the state of Tennessee, and only 9 had growth funds, and we were one of them. And the other is we have seen, as you will see in the budget document, an increase in the local option sales tax. We're budgeting $400,000 more dollars this year than we did the previous year, and that is based on the actual sales tax from last year. So I want to note that our projection does not include any future over the next year local option sales tax from the Lake District or Lakeland Town Square or Aldi or any of these other fairly significant tax generating projects that could come online. So seeing 400,000 additional in the last year certainly is a good sign for Lakeland and for the school system. All right, we have built in 2% increases in the salary schedules of all employees, and I want to say that's regardless of any revisions at this point to the governor's education budget. Last year, we had hoped to include some increases in the governor's raises that he had essentially approved were rescinded due to the pandemic. This year, we're doing it no matter what, and we have the 2% in there and feel like we can sustain that no matter what actions are or are not taken. And just so you know, that's about $273,000 is what that amounts to. And then we are doing the step increases to all employees on step schedules, which is another $306,000, which may surprise some folks that just honoring the step schedules every year is actually amounts to more than a 2% salary increase across the board. I announced this at last month's meeting, but it's certainly good news from a budget standpoint, and it's good news from an employee standpoint. There's no increase to health insurance premiums for the 21-22 school year that we're very excited about. So this is the time usually when I tell you if there is one, but fortunately there's not, so I left it in there. As I noted, this includes the addition of one regular ed teacher at LES, in addition to one speech-language pathologist at LES. That would bring our in-house full-time speech-language pathologists at the elementary school to 3, which gives you some indication of how in demand that particular therapy is in our community. And our SLPs do a great job, and we even hear from people that move to Lakeland because they're aware of the quality of our speech-language pathology program. We'll also be adding the addition of one special ed assistant at LES and an increase in the hours for our contracted SLP, which is speech-language pathologist. So in addition to adding a full-time SLP, we're also going to increase the contract. We tend to, with our therapists, do a combination of in-house and then contracted services, which works well. And then we're going to add 3 days a week of contracted occupational therapy services that could work at either school, actually. We've been discussing this for quite some time. This budget includes the creation of a high school vice principal position and the creation of a high school counselor position. We have been notified by Mr. Adler that Ms. Manthe at the middle school will actually take the high school position, and we have posted for a middle school counselor. Ms. Manthe is an experienced high school counselor, so that was a good opportunity there. But we are putting those things into the budget, and I will note that these are positions that don't have any additional students tied to them yet. So again, we're in the past, we have sometimes taken things like this out of fund balance. Ms. Rosales was able to identify the funds so that we did not have to do that for this year, so we're taking these out of the general operational fund. The general fund, rather. We have been discussing and anticipating this. We've got some additions to the building maintenance, about $18,000, the lawn maintenance of about $29,000, and I want to note the field maintenance account. We did build in $140,000 for field maintenance at Lakeland Prep. That is absolutely a worst-case scenario. That would be taking care of all of the fields if we were paying for every bit of it completely ourselves, 2 cuts a week, overseeding, top dressing, fertilization, the whole bit, treating basically every field close to equally, with the exception of some reel cutting on the game fields. In reality, we know that based on our MOU, the city will contribute to some of the costs of the 5 fields. We also know that typically booster clubs contribute significantly, if not entirely, to the maintenance of their own fields. But we did want to have a good number that we could put in that was based on an actual quote that I got from a organization that does this kind of thing, just so we would have it in there as a worst-case scenario. Because we do know, particularly in this first year, it may take the school system kind of getting these fields propped up as we build up things like booster clubs and things like that. We want to have the fields the way they need to be, regardless. It also includes funds for 9th grade Chromebooks and teacher devices, so we are kind of thinking ahead. We're aware that we're going to have an extra grade level needing Chromebooks, which is a significant investment, so we have that built in as well. And I want to talk a little bit about this is really part of the salary schedule discussion, but we are really excited to be introducing kind of a standardization of our director positions and a new kind of tier of administrative supervisor that we used to call facilitator. And when we started both our directors and our facilitators, they were all essentially being placed on salaries for the facilitators based on their teacher experience and where they fell on the teacher salary schedule. And the directors often had to do with possibly what they had been doing previously, or when they came in, it was more negotiated individually with the individuals that were doing those jobs. In one case, one of the directors was based on a teacher salary schedule in the case of Dr. Terrell, the first one that we had. One of my goals, and one of the goals I think in terms of, it's on the system strategic plan, was to do some salary schedule research and to make sure that we're being competitive and we're being consistent and we're being fair. So what we've done is taken, as far as the directors go, we've taken 3 individuals that were kind of all over the map and yet with similar levels of responsibility, and put them on a standardized salary schedule. And we are essentially eliminating what was previously the facilitator position. When we hired our instructional facilitators, our student services facilitator, and our federal programs facilitator, they were basically hired as teacher leaders, and there was not an expectation that they would have formally administrative responsibilities. Starting next year, the supervisors will be required to be administrators with master's degrees and administrative licenses, and they will all be on step 0 of this new supervisor salary schedule, and the directors will all be on step 0 of this new director salary schedule. And those that would be in the director tier would be the directors of technology, directors of finance, director of human resources and payroll, and director of special education. And then our supervisors would be, and I say administrative supervisors again because this would require the administrative degree. K-4 instruction supervisor of 5-8 instruction, student services and counseling supervisor, and federal programs supervisor. And these would be the current facilitators in those positions. So these wouldn't be positions that we post. These would be essentially moving the facilitators into administrative roles. The other thing, when you saw the amount that was the total for that, that also includes moving the facilitators from 7.5 hours a day to 8 hours a day. And then they'll be compensated for that extra half hour. But the 7.5 hours was more of a teacher schedule, and they'll be on a central office 8 hours a day schedule now. So it kind of cleans up all those areas, and it's been a kind of a long-term project. I'll also note we are doing this, I think, clearly in anticipation of the expansion of Lakeland Prep and introducing the high school grades. So this is something that, looking forward, one I think mistake we made last time with some of our staffing when the middle school opened was waiting until it was actually open, when most of the work happens before it opens. It seems obvious to say, but we wanted to do this in a forward-thinking way. And that concludes kind of the overview. There's some little, changes here and there, but mainly they just have to do with specifics in those line items. But certainly if you have any questions for me or for Ms. Rosales, we're here to take those questions.
Questions for the superintendent? Ms. Harrison?
So you talked about K-4 instruction, 5-8 instructional, these are the one that are going to the administrative supervisor. Are we planning ahead and including a 9 through 12, or would that fall under the vice principal role or some other role?
In the short term, we have discussed that. In the short term, it would fall under the vice principal role, certainly with support from the 5-8 instructional supervisor. We're thinking in some of these areas would not necessarily need that until you had certainly at least 9th and 10th grade. So maybe in that third year, it might open itself up to the scope. But really, the vice principal serves as the instructional supervisor for the high school.
Any other questions for the superintendent on the budget? Ms. Childs?
Well, you mentioned funds for 9th grade Chromebooks and teacher devices, so are you buying those next year for the following year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, as you know, our budget year goes through June 30, so we'd have to purchase them well in advance of, the summer to have them ready for the 2022. Yeah.
And then, the other question I had about the field maintenance, how is the field maintenance paid for now? I mean, I know we don't have many fields, but we do have a couple right now, so is this, will that be lumped in with that, or?
It was included. Really, the only true field that we have is the soccer field, which frankly, right now, doesn't look great. It has not been kind of maintained on a professional standard as
Kind
this,
of part of my question.
as this would need to be. No, I think we've basically been having our lawn, service cut that field. We did provide a lawnmower for it to be cut. We've had some conversations recently at the school level about what needs to happen to make that field playable, or more, I'm sorry, it's playable, but more presentable, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Typically what happens is the parents, the booster club, kind of grab hold of those fields and do much of the maintenance themselves. So we're trying to get a handle on that. It's harder with the middle school, though. It just frankly has been,
Any other questions for the superintendent? I would like to, Dr. Horrell, and we've talked about this before, but would you mind kind of just giving an overview of the job description of the vice principal for the next year or so?
I'm going to move back over
Sure.
here just so I'm on camera at least, not that anybody wants to see me. But. Yeah, so the high school vice principal, traditionally and typically, at least in this area, is really the kind of instructional, the main instructional lead in the building, supervising everything from teacher evaluation to curriculum, being extremely involved in teacher hiring, and mainly focusing on instructional decisions. The way we framed the vice principal position for now in a combined middle and high school would be actually a fairly comprehensive administrative position that would lead the creation of every aspect of the 9th grade and beyond. So would work directly with Mr. Adler, who would still be supervising the process, but would be answering the questions about curriculum, about athletics, about fine arts, about timetables. What I've said frequently is to picture what Mr. Adler and Ms. Martin were doing in the year leading up to the opening of Lakeland Middle, and ideally, this individual would be the point person for those things. And we're really going to have such a tremendous advantage of being in the same building with this year's 7th graders as next year's 8th graders to try to answer those questions, work with parents, find out what the priorities are for the high school, what the desires are for the high school, and then to implement them, working with Mr. Adler and certainly with our staff. But this would be really comprehensive kind of planning head for the high school grades.
I know I'm probably not the only one. We're getting a lot of questions about extracurricular activities and are we planning for those? And I knew that was the case, but I wanted to hear you say it out loud that the vice principal will be kind of taking on those duties for this next year as it relates to
Absolutely.
sports and other extracurricular activities.
Clubs, clubs, sports, schedules, courses, electives, all those things, certainly.
Any other questions for the superintendent on the budget? Ms. Childs?
This is random, but I know we switched to this new system of recording and live streaming. Will it ever have the capability that the viewer at home could see, like any, like the presentation you just had on up there?
The answer is yes, and I'll just fully admit, one of the things on the back channel administration of this, there is a screen that when I turned that on today, it popped up in one of the windows very clearly, which suggests that it could be shown if I knew how to toggle between the screens, which I don't know. But yes, I believe that will be, I believe that's possible.
Work in progress.
It absolutely is, yeah.
Very good. Any other questions? Hearing none, we'll leave this on our regular agenda for next week, but we'll move to the next numbered item.
Next item is discussion action on salary schedules for 21-22.
Dr. Horrell?
On this one, I want to acknowledge Jessica Millspaugh, who takes the lead as our HR and payroll director of putting the salary schedules together. It is an onerous and thankless task, I think, doing that part as well. And we did spend quite a bit of time this past year kind of refining those. One thing that I think you'll see, I'm not going to go over them in too much detail individually, they kind of speak for themselves. However, I did want to note that one, I think, enhancement that Ms. Millspaugh recommended, I think as a result of a lot of the conversations we have, is including in the salary schedule how many months each employee works, how many days that translates to, how many hours is that day, because that actually varies, and how many total hours is that expected to be over the course of a contract year. It can be very confusing, I think, for folks to maybe sometimes compare salaries to one another. When we spend a lot of time talking about what is an annualized schedule, and one thing you have to consider if something's annualized is, in some cases, especially if you're going from a teacher to a 12-month, you're not only changing the number of days, but the number of hours working within that day. So this just in terms of transparency, we feel like this is a good improvement, so people can kind of see exactly what it is that we're paying for in these cases, and makes it easier to kind of pull out and annualize. We have some positions where folks work essentially at the same salary rate, but they only work 210 days versus 260 days, for example. So this kind of clarifies it. This does include the 2% increases to the salary schedules, as well as the changes to the supervisor and director tiers, and every position in the system. So,
Any questions on the salary schedule? Ms. Childs?
I'm just going to say, I think that's a smart inclusion to include how many hours and days.
thank you, Ms. Millspaugh. Good idea.
Any objection to carrying this item over to our consent agenda? Hearing no objection, we'll carry this item over to the consent agenda. Next item.
Next item, the one you've really been waiting for, it's the spring 2021 discard list.
One of my favorites. Dr. Horrell?
Come for the budget presentation, stay for the discard list. This is on our annual agenda, and this is basically the opportunity, typically for our technology department, to kind of thin the herd of technology that's outdated or in need of being surplused. So what we have here is a list of basically the categories and how many things are in those categories, everything from 193 obsolete white MacBooks, and trust me when I say this, we use the computers as long as we possibly can for just about anything we can, and if it's on this list, it can't be used anymore. So what I'll do next is read the serial numbers of the 193. We can produce that. We do have a list of serial numbers and decided it wouldn't be that helpful to link it to the agenda, but we are asking for board approval of the discard list.
Any discussion on this item?
I would like to know what year the iPods are from.
That is knowable, and I can have
I'm
that
just
for you. Yeah, the resale value is not what it used to be on the iPod.
Almost every item on this
great point. Yeah, there's, Ms. Rosales is pointing out, these are many things that came to the district from Shelby County, so.
Any other comments on this item? Any objection to carrying this over to our consent agenda? Hearing no objection, we'll carry this item over to the consent agenda. Next item.
Next item, almost as exciting, is a discussion action on the 21-22 school nutrition agreements.
Dr. Horrell?
These are basically, if you look at the agreement to administer the school nutrition program, these are federal programs, and there's a certain amount of paperwork that's certainly required with any federal program. And what this does is kind of at the end of the day, it indicates, the signatures indicate that we understand and agree to all the terms and conditions contained in the free and reduced policy statement to operate the school nutrition program, and some other items like that, that we're going to make available the appropriate agricultural products, allow flexible bidding, which we do, and require that all food provided for public school use meet or exceed food safety standards. So this is another annual requirement that says that we're going to do what we need to do with our nutrition program.
Any discussion on this item? Mr. Burnett?
It has your name and Ed and Ms. Rosales, so the three of you would be the ones going to federal prison, right?
Actually, I think he'd be okay, probably. I think it's Ms. Rosales. No.
Very good. Any further discussion or legal threats? Hearing none. Any objection to carrying this item over to our consent agenda? Hearing no objection, we'll carry this item over. Next item.
Next item is discussion action on 2021 budget amendments. Those will be ready for the business meeting. As you guys know, we typically handle budget amendments during the actual, and the finance report during the actual business meeting.
Carry this item over to our regular agenda next week. Next item.
Next item is also a placeholder. This is the textbook adoption committee recommendation. Typically, our textbook adoption committee consists of the instructional facilitators and Ms. Deloso. We have requested the parents, one from each school, from the principals, that would also serve on those committees, and we will have those names for you at the business meeting.
Carry this item over to our regular agenda next week. Next item.
Next item is review of the policy manual, section 6 of the first half. At this time, we don't have any policies that we're aware of that would be added to the business meeting.
And that does not require any action on the board. Dr. Horrell, is there any other business that needs to come before the board?
Not that I'm aware, no.
Are there any announcements?
I don't know, it's kind of near and dear to my heart, but I'll just remind this board that, so we formed in 2013-14, and the 5th grade class that year, when we formed our school system, is actually the graduating class this year. So those 5th graders that were at Lakeland Elementary that year is actually the graduating class. So near and dear to my heart because I have one, but it's a very monumental time for us when we came into existence and these students that are graduating. So just a history lesson there.
Flies when you're having
Anything to
fun.
think about. That's amazing. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Any other announcements? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.
All right.